This is Game 1 of the 2011 Western Finals between the Mavs and the Thunder. Dallas took care of business in round 1, then stunned the two-time defending champion Lakers in a sweep. They trail this one late in the second quarter when Dirk goes to work, drawing a double team, kicking it out so the ball can find an open shooter. A minute later, it's 4-on-4 in transition. Serge Ibaka sees the sharpshooting Jason Terry on the wing, and that's enough for Nowitzki to cut behind him for an old-fashioned three-point play. On the next possession, Dirk posts up Nick Collison, sets up the one-legged fade, and look at that soft touch. Now, to start this game, the Thunder stuck the shot-blocking Ibaka on Nowitzki, but he had little effect on the 7-foot German's crazy high release. So in the third, when Dirk came off this little screen, Ibaka panicked and fouled him on the jumper. They sent Serge to the bench and tried Durant on him next with a double team, and it was more tic-tac-toe for another 3. After a few possessions where they went away from Nowitzki, they went back to him against Durant, who was too handsy, and it was more free throws. So the Thunder tried defensive specialist Thabo Sefolosha on Dirk, but he was so freaked out about his shot, it opened up the spin and a trip back to the line. Sefolosha gives up about 6 inches there, so OKC brings Kendrick Perkins to help near the rim, but that draws an erroneous 3-second call and gives Dirk yet another free throw at the charity stripe. The next time, Nowitzki just posts up and drops the little one-legger off the glass, and then when the Mavs break out in transition, Dirk's version of a layup is a wide-open 10-footer. With the lead suddenly 11, they go back to Nowitzki on the outside. This time OKC doubles on the spin, and we're right back to wide open threes. Against 4 different defenders in just over a quarter of play, Dirk set up or scored 31 of Dallas's 41 points to blow the game open in the best performance of a magical run toward the title. So was 2011 the one year he finally put everything together, or was Dirk good enough to be a championship centerpiece for that entire decade? Was he really the best shooting big man in NBA history? And despite averaging fewer than 3 assists per game, at his peak, was he actually the best offensive player in the NBA?
Bird in all this?
Has it blocked by Elijah Wan.
Michael Jordan saves the day.
The first season of Greatest Peaks was about the best of the best. But this time we're looking at trendsetters, unique archetypes, and even controversial players who make up the legends of NBA offense.
We remember him now as like this killer at the end of games.
Right,
like,
yeah.
you know, like
Closer, yeah.
right? That wasn't his personality at first. He had to overcome with a lot of hard work, and like, you know, he grew into that.
It's easy to forget, but young Dirk Nowitzki was a physical marvel, a 7-foot unicorn with the fluidity and coordination of a wing. This is a giant man running pick and roll, spinning and hanging to kiss it off the glass. He could face up, fake that spin move into a twisting fadeaway, and this is some straight up Michael Jordan appropriation from Dirk, who was probably the first 7-footer to move with such fluidity while attacking the basket. The hair was quite fluid too. Look, when he was young, he was often compared to Larry Bird because of his outside shooting and possibly the hair, but Bird was incredibly nimble for a 6'9" player, and Dirk was even sturdier and more comfortable with the ball on the perimeter. He's handling in transition, hesitates, and then flows downhill with the soft touch. Yet, fancy ball handling wasn't a part of Dirk's game at all. He just protected it well enough to drive or set up his shot. A few episodes back, we saw Reggie Miller curl off screens and score in the paint. And even at his size, Dirk could fly off these with authority. So he was enormous, But he could also come off these screens and fire because he was one of the best shooters ever. In the early 2000s, he took about 5 threes per game, making them at a healthy 39%. But Nowitzki actually took fewer of these over the years as he shaped his game around his mid-range shooting. Some of this was just a blind spot of the era, bypassing threes for less valuable long twos. But a lot of it was Dirk operating in his sweet spot where he could shoot right over just about anyone with an efficient attempt. Since mid-range shooting has been recorded, Nowitzki is the king of the long two, peaking at nearly 9% ahead of the league on over 8 attempts every 36 minutes. That was a nice improvement from an already strong first half of the decade, and he hit even higher percentages late in his career on slightly less volume. That outside shooting was the foundation of his entire game, because back then, this was efficient half-court offense on demand because of his size and high release point. If defenders started crowding him to bother that shot, he'd go to the up fake for a blow-by. The next time they run the same play, Tim Duncan isn't quite as close to stop the drive, so Dirk pops one right over him. You'll see this sequence constantly with Nowitzki. In 2011, he gets a little room to shoot over Pau Gasol, and a few minutes later, Pau crowds him to take away that shot, which opens room to drive, and then the incredible touch on the hook. Dirk's driving game was never about a big quickness edge, it was about teasing defenders with that shot, and then having the coordination to bring it home. I love this sequence from the 2002 playoffs, where Kevin Garnett studies him as he mesmerizes Rasho Nesterovic with a series of fakes before launching, only to come back in the second half in the same situation against Garnett until he reacts to a possible shot and drives instead for the and one. In the next round against Chris Webber, Dirk uses the shot fake to draw free throws from about 17 feet away, and he killed defenders with this up and under move for his entire career. Penetrators like Dwayne Wade or Michael Jordan shot a ton of freebies because they were impossible to stay in front of and exploded at the rim. But Dirk matched their free throw volume with his shot because opponents were so afraid of it. They were constantly lunging at him in a panic or whacking his arm while desperately trying to contest that unblockable mid-ranger. So even without a heavy driving game, Dirk was one of the most prolific foul drawers in playoff history, and at 90%, that meant nearly automatic points. We saw something similar in episode 2 from Miller, only Dirk took more free throws than Reggie, probably because he could also bang around the basket with his size. And this is where that fluid movement really helped, because his defender is pulled out by his shot, and he could drive at him like an under-control wing. Because he was under control, he could turn and shoot over either shoulder from, like, anywhere, and that messed with defenders' heads too, freeing up little openings that are hard to see in real time. Sean Marion thinks Dirk is spinning into the fadeaway here, and that little lunge turns it into an open layup. The same thing happened in his legendary Game 7 against San Antonio in 2006, where Bruce Bowen thought Dirk would spin into a jumper. He throws his hands up to contest, and Dirk keeps going and sends the game to OT with a three-point play. And then again, 5 years later in Game 2 of the finals, tied at 93 in the final seconds, Dirk went to the same spin hesitation on Chris Bosh to steal the game. And it works because Bosh is ready to contest the shot, and that throws him out of position, and Dirk's size and skill do the rest. Nowitzki's always had a post-up game because he could pivot into that high release point, and this is a really nice back down in spin in 2003 against the Spurs. But his post game wasn't quite as robust in the early 2000s as it would be later. Even though his shooting gradually improved, he always had that ridiculous shot making right over opponents, but he didn't always have the balance and sturdiness he would have later on some of these moves. He backs down the smaller Marion here, but is thrown off by turning into the contact, and in the mid-2000s, he developed a reputation for failing to really punish smaller defenders in the postseason. Against Steve Nash here, he's not entirely in control, and this is a really difficult shot. But by the end of the decade, he was more deliberate about punishing switches in these situations. Dirk was never quick enough to blow by these smaller defenders, but he tightened his ball handling a little bit and added more to that post-game, working with his mentor Holger Geschwindner to improve his lower body strength so he could back down smaller defenders and dictate the move he was going to give them. Look at how sturdy these actions are, backing down a bigger defender, going to the up fake, and then falling back away. And he's completely balanced and in control the entire time. On the next trip, he has a smaller defender on him, works right to his sweet spot, and goes to the same move. That strength shows up on drives too, where he can just power through contact for a dunk and back down bigger opponents while remaining perfectly under control to set up a fadeaway. It's almost as if slowing down with age helped the game slow down for Dirk, especially in these high-pressure situations posting up. And according to Synergy Tracking, from the middle of the 2000s to 2011, Dirk nearly doubled his post-up frequency while peaking in efficiency. And of course, he developed his one-legged fadeaway, one of the most unguardable signature moves in NBA history. Holger apparently wanted him to develop a hook shot, but the one-legger was a natural extension of Dirk's two-legged fall-away that he'd had for so many years. Only this version could have a quicker release, and he increased his body angle on that fade to make it harder to contest. The off-leg also acted like a shield to create additional space. It keeps Lamar Odom at bay here while releasing the ball over that other leg. And since he gravitated toward twisting off-balance shots, that extra lean was almost natural for him. So natural that I actually found a random one-legger way back in 2001. He formally developed it years later with that improved strength and stability because he could take contact and stay balanced comfortably on one leg. He didn't actually use it a ton, but it was a key addition to his improved post-game over these years. For instance, he's cut off nicely here, but can pivot into this thing, and that's unfair. Dirk was already a good playoff scorer in the early part of his career, but his improvements turned him into one of the best ever, with a 3-year peak of 29 points per 75 on efficiency 9% better than expected. So, we know Dirk was one of the great shooters and scorers the league has ever seen, but how much did that scoring actually help his teammates? And if he didn't run through 1,000 screens like Steph Curry, was there another way he could help his teammates without racking up any assists?
I'm trying to figure out how you're going to deal with him in the post if he goes in there. How are you going to find him in transition? All those things. You know, when he sets a screen, it's like a double screen on your guys because you got to hug him.
In the last episode, we saw the incredible power of Steve Nash's playmaking, which was a theme during the first season of Greatest Peaks with offensive engines like Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson. But Dirk wasn't an elite passer or even prolific ball handler who pressured defenses. Now, one of the reasons his assists were low was he could bypass teammates to shoot into double teams. And with his release point, these doubles didn't bother him as much, so it's not terrible to ignore shooters up top or in the corner if these are still high percentage shots. But a bigger reason for low assists is that he wouldn't anticipate passing openings on plays like this. Here's another example where he doesn't see this opening in time, but then San Antonio ends up sending a double, which creates late clock offense for a teammate. Dirk was always a pretty willing passer, especially against the double teaming defender. He's working up top, Chris Paul comes over to help, so he shoots it to a wide open Jason Kidd. This time he drives to set up that up fake move, runs right into Kobe Bryant, and Kidd is in his sight line, so he punishes the help. These are solid but reactionary plays. Duncan doubles, so Dirk looks for Duncan's man with a great delivery over the top. Some of his best passes were actually these jump passes, where a cutter runs into his line of sight on the shot. So on a play like this, he sees Shaq stepping up to help and slips it to his man. What he almost never did in these spots was manipulate the defense. The double comes. Now this defender needs to worry about the shooter or cutter, and Dirk sees that he takes the cutter, so a basic kick out is the fallback option. We saw this one earlier, where Tyson Chandler is going to flash into position underneath, but the more basic play still leads to good offense. And I'm not sure I've ever seen him throw a lob pass to a vertical mismatch under the hoop in these spots, but even without advanced passing connections, his secondary reads, like a nice skip pass, still led to high percentage looks. Here's one where he jab steps to score, then quickly slips a pass in, and that was tough to handle, but I love the idea. Although Dirk wasn't always crisp in his execution on some of his passes. The placement could be a little off, or the delivery could be a little slow, like on this after timeout play where he's looking for a Chandler lob, and the pass is way too low and it's deflected for a harder shot. So Dirk's on-ball playmaking helped his teammates a little bit, but he wasn't a volume playmaker with the ball who generated a layup line for his teammates. What Dirk did have was a presence away from the ball that made life easier for others. This was most notable as a screener, where his defender wanted to step out to slow down the ball, but also didn't want to leave Dirk open to shoot from the outside. And the result could be plays like this, where the ball handler ends up with a red carpet to the basket. Here's one where Ibaka just velcros himself to Dirk. A third defender needs to help, and I think it was a little breezy in the arena there. Sometimes the fear of Nowitzki's pick and pop shooting could pull a defender right out of the way, and someone close the window, please. This kind of gravitational pull on defenders was present early in the decade. Relieving pressure for his guards to attack off his screens, they run him off a pick here first, and Garnett prioritizes Dirk over the ball, so Nick Van Exel ends up with an opening. With big men clinging to Nowitzki on the outside, an opposing shot blocker is removed from the paint, so pulling that big body out of the lane gave his teammates more space to drive into. Dirk usually played on teams with good spacing, where the paint wasn't completely clogged up, but he was also responsible for that spacing by drawing defenders away from the basket. Remember, teams were worried about his outside shooting proficiency, so instead of the big man running back to the rim here, he finds Dirk and sticks to him while Dallas practices a layup drill. The benefits of stretch big men and spacing became commonplace across the league years later, but back in 2011, this was still a futuristic pick and roll setup. Here's a wing pick and roll with 3 shooters spaced behind the line, and Dirk's man is reluctant to leave him uncovered. And this wasn't a factor on every play, but it's a kind of latent value that gave Dallas more breathing room than most offenses. We can see just how much Dirk's gravity and solid passing decisions helped his teammates by looking at their scoring numbers with him off versus on the floor. Most of the other primary Mavs were far more efficient when he was on the court, because his presence can have subtle effects on every possession. And just like Nash helped his big men in 2-man actions, Dirk helped his guards. He didn't spike the team's shot quality quite as much as Nash, but this is a pretty incredible track record over the course of a decade. Dirk's off-ball game paired perfectly with dynamic guards because he was so good at capitalizing on these actions when the ball hit him. Teams were worried about that shot, so he'd attack a recovering defender off the dribble instead. And he had a great feel for punishing a closeout by taking it all the way to the rim, or he could catch and go right into a pull-up from the mid-range. This is yet another area where the threat of his shot unlocked an extra way to attack opponents, and he was great at driving as he caught it to quickly turn an advantage into something even better. Those skills fit next to so many ball handlers. A shooter like Terry draws defenders, so he kicks to Dirk for the jumper. But a great passer like Kidd can feed him in his sweet spots, and then when help comes, reset so Dirk can catch off the drive for a big layup. This one puts it all together, where Nowitzki and Kidd play a two-man game of hot potato. That starts to strain the defense, and when they worry about Dirk, Kidd can fake it into a drive and use his passing to find someone else. A key to this is how quickly Nowitzki attacks off ball. He's slower in isolation, working to draw help and create this advantage, but when it comes back to him, it's a fast attack off one or two dribbles, gets to a sweet spot, and finishes. Another approach in off-ball spots was to take one dribble and pass on the move, and he clearly developed the intention to act quickly and decisively attacking closeouts in catch-and-go situations. He didn't do it a ton because he was such a big scorer, but I think his best passes came in these off-ball spots, where he goes right into the move, and then if he sees extra bodies, he knows there's a pass available. Here's a nice example where LA sends extra defenders, so he quickly looks cross-court for the opening, and that's a great skip. And this translates to his version of short roll passing, with a dribble and change of sides to find the shooter. When we look at multi-year stretches of playoff performance, Dirk was part of a very good Dallas offense at the beginning of the decade with Steve Nash. Although they were still really good in the 400 minutes Nowitzki was off the court. That was an offensively heavy team that took out a loaded Kings squad in 2003 to make the Western Finals, only to play San Antonio to a near draw when Dirk was on the floor before he went down with an injury in Game 3. After Nash went to Phoenix, Dallas put more defenders around Dirk, and from 2006 to 2008, those offenses weren't quite as good, but the drop-off when Dirk went to the bench was far more significant. That team of Jason Terry and slashers like Josh Howard came within 2 games of the title, actually outscoring Miami with Dirk on the court and losing all 3 close games in the series by just a combined 6 points. Finally, from 2009 to 2011, the Mavs' playoff offenses jumped back up while relying even more on Nowitzki's presence to warp the court. That was the most complete offensive version of Dirk, so defenders like Tyson Chandler and Sean Marion could fit next to shooters, while a trio of guards benefited from Dirk's pick-and-pop gravity. And I think a reason he had so much offensive success for such a long time is because he was so valuable without the ball, almost like a post-oriented version of Reggie Miller, who made the game easier for so many teammates. And for my money, all that scoring, shooting, and perimeter gravity made Dirk Nowitzki one of the greatest offensive players to ever play. To support this channel, check out patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. That's where you can find extra content. We have a community, live Q&As, and more. I'm interested to hear what you think of Dirk. For me, I'm not sure I can name 3 big men at their peak who I'd rather have on offense than him. Thanks as always for watching, and of course, I hope you are having a great day.